Good evening. Welcome to Transition Talks Tuesdays with the School District of Janesville. Tonight is our eighth in our 8-part series on transition. And tonight we have Barbara Katz, one of the co-founders, co-directors of Family Voices of Wisconsin. And we're really excited to have her here talking to us tonight about thinking about supported decision-making. And I should say, after talking to you before, Barbara, not talking to us about supported decision-making, but talking with us and having a conversation with us about supported decision-making. So welcome, glad you are here.
Thank you. And I just realized that I need to make an adjustment to the slideshow. So while I am, because it is moving on its own. Whoops.
Oh, it's not supposed to do that.
Correct.
If
so
the slideshows are starting to have artificial intelligence, then I think we are on our way to Terminator. I think that's one of the first signs is when PowerPoints run themselves. It is the end of the world. Right? Absolutely.
So just give me 1 minute, please. And
no problem. I will let people know that previous to this Transition Talks Tuesdays, we did have a series of Transition Talks Tuesdays with DeForest School District. And we do have a school district that is, I'm talking to this week. So we may be doing Transition Talks Tuesdays again in January. And for those of you who signed up to be part of the Southern Regional Center listserv, you'll get information on how to join those, just in case you didn't get enough transition information. We've got more and we will share it with you in the new year. Are you all set to go, Barbara?
We're all good, Tim. Thanks so much.
Fantastic.
So hi, everybody. It's nice to be back to Transition Tuesdays. And I was here earlier in the year doing What's After High School, and now I'm here to do a deeper dive into supported decision making. So I'm curious if there are any family members on this call tonight. And you can either unmute yourself or put it in the chat box.
And I think if you are an educational professional and have a child with special health care needs, disability, a parent, we know that matters and we count that as parents. Absolutely. So you could be here in a dual role. And if you are, please just let us know.
And the reason why I'm asking is the way I'll be talking tonight, whether I'll be if I'm talking to family members or to educational staff or to a combination. So I'm just curious who's here. Don't be shy. Hi, Eric and Robin. Great, thank you.
And I am going to go out on a limb and comparing my attendance sheet to my screen names. I'm going to say pretty much everybody else is associated with the School District of Janesville and our excellent transition specialists and educational professionals that want to learn about transition. So
that sounds great. About supported decision making. That's great.
Absolutely.
So who's heard of supported decision making? Thanks, Jenny. Who's heard of supported decision making? So I'll ask 2 questions. Who's heard of it? And if you have heard of it, what do you think it is?
Okay, we're getting some responses in the chat.
I see. I can see the chat.
Oh, good.
Yep.
Good.
Yep. Thanks. So for those of you who have heard of it, what do you think it is? So one person says individuals' chances to make their own decisions. Yep. Gives the individual more rights. Yep. That's both of those are correct. What else? What else have you heard about supported decision making? Well, let's dive into it. So we talk about supported decision-making and we talk about assistance with decision-making because any person in Wisconsin over the age of 18 is recognized as a legal adult. And what that means is the law presumes competence. So the law in Wisconsin presumes that everybody, regardless of label or diagnosis, is competent to make their own decisions and has the civil right to make their own decisions. So that means that they can choose where to live, they can choose with whom to live, they can consent to medical treatment, to vote, to enter into different contracts, basically to enjoy the same rights that you or I enjoy as legal adults in Wisconsin. So as I said, the law presumes competence. The law says everybody is competent to make choices and make decisions. It's people who determine whether or not somebody is competent to do that. And traditionally, and I would say pretty much up to about 4 or 5 years ago, that route for supported decision-making was essentially guardianship. And that was a route that, while there were other routes open before 5, 6 years ago, and there are more now, guardianship was the most frequently used tool. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But the reason we're talking about this is because for some people, when they turn 18, they do need assistance with making decisions. Prior to 18, they might have needed that same assistance, but they were considered minor children. And so their parents or guardians were the ones who legally made decisions on their behalf. I like to say, and if you were with us when we did What's After High School, I like to say that transition begins at birth. And what I mean by that is the time that we start working with our kids to make choices, make decisions, that we give them opportunities for growth and development, that we start helping them figure out what in this great big world interests them the most, and hopefully give them opportunities to advance those interests of theirs. And so when we talk about choice making and decision making, and we think about our kids or those kids who we're now teaching, we think about what experiences and opportunities they had around decision-making and choice-making. And one of the reasons why we do this training, and I hope that the educators on this call will share this information with families, is because families need this information early. They need information early that it's important for them to support their kids in making choices, making decisions, learning skills around how to make choices and how to make decisions. And to start earlier gives a person with a disability more time to practice that choice making and decision making. And what that will lead to is hopefully when they come to transition and that age of 18, they have had many experiences and opportunities to make decisions with support if they need it, and choices, and then either live with the benefits or the consequences of those choices and decisions. And so one of the things that we at Family Voices feel very strongly about is that families need information around both how to think about choice making and decision making with their kids at different stages and different ages for their children, so that they come to the transition point and are not fearful of less restrictive options than those such as guardianship. And I say not fearful because there's a lot of myths, I think, that live around guardianship. I think there's the myth that guardianship can keep kids safe, that guardianship will always protect people with disabilities, that people with disabilities might not ever develop the skill set to make choices and decisions. And if we start by giving families information and helping them give their kids information early and often around these different learning opportunities for choice making and decision making, for the exploration and development of these decision making skills, will all lead to more confidence in working with their kids around different options in supported decision making. So let's dig in a little. In a few minutes, we'll dig into what those options are. But I just want to give you some statistics and some thoughts about guardianship, that more traditional route that people choose. We're talking about decision making now, frankly, because guardianship has skyrocketed. The number of guardianships that are sought around for people around the country, well, has tripled since 1995. And what we find from self-advocates, from individuals with disabilities who advocate very effectively on their own behalf, who are under guardianship, where we learn more and more that guardianships might have been awarded to people that really didn't need guardianships, but there were but the parents who sought that, allies who sought the guardianships for people with disabilities might not have been aware of what other choices are in supported decision making. And so that's why we see so many guardianships. And that is largely because people just don't know about options. I myself am a parent of an adult son who had, well, I have 3 adult sons, but my middle son, Ben, is 30 now. And when he was 18, my husband and I did seek and were awarded guardianship for him. We were never told about any other options. We were never told about, Ben was never talked to about this. Ben was, until the guardianship process was underway, my son Ben was never informed that his decision-making rights would be taken away. It is true that he did not at that point understand what that meant. And we, my husband and I, did not have the skills to help him understand what that would mean. The other thing is too, when I remember when we went through the guardianship process, no one talked to us about the fact that the law presumes competence in people with disabilities. Nobody used those words. Nobody explained that to us. Basically, Ben's school team, Ben's doctor, Ben's therapist have said, well, of course, you're going to go seek guardianship, and this is the process you have to go through it. But short of talking to us about what the process is, nobody talked with us about the implications or the impact. Nobody explained to us that of course we realized this afterwards, but nobody laid it out and said, by going through guardianship, you are essentially taking away Ben's civil rights to make his own choices, make his own decisions. And if awarded, the court will be putting that decision-making authority onto you, the guardians. And while we might not have made a different decision, I felt cheated in a sense that we never were given a choice, and we were never informed. It was not an informed choice. It was more like, of course you're going to go seek guardianship, right? And so I feel very strongly, and we at Family Voices feel very strongly that when families are thinking about different options in supported decision-making, that it is critical that they make informed decisions and informed choices, which is why we're doing this training tonight, and which is why we are offering this and really encourage educators and professionals who support families to make sure that families and youth are making informed decisions. So I'll pause here before we get into sort of the mechanics and the nuts and bolts of different supported decision-making tools, to see if anybody has any comments or thoughts about what I've talked about so far, or any questions.
I just wanted to say that for years, I've always thought of it in the same terms that you've described, talking about just going from the, I guess, approach that the only option is to consider maintaining guardianship. So it's really good to hear about this and hear more about it. And I'm wondering, like, how do you phrase what do you call the conversation? Before it was always talking about guardianship. Like, do you have a better way to phrase it other than that?
So let's talk about this term. That's a great question. So let's talk about this term of supported decision-making. So some of you might know that about 5 years ago in Wisconsin, there was the development and legislative passage of what's called a supported decision-making tool that is a legally recognized tool. It's a tool that's really promoted by the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities, and it is something that they championed, and they have an amazing toolkit on their website about this, and we're going to be talking a little bit more. But when I talk about supported decision making, I talk about it as almost a continuum. And I talk about these tools in supported decision making as a continuum from least restrictive to most restrictive being guardianship. And so I would say the catch-all phrase would be supported decision making. Or if people find that confusing and confuse it with the supported decision-making tool, you might want to think about something like assistance with decision-making, which I know is a more cumbersome phrase, but the more you use it, the more it sort of rolls off your tongue. And so you can think about assistance with decision-making options, decision-making, different decision-making tools. So there's a variety of ways, but sort of the most recognized way to think about this continuum is in fact supported decision-making. And we're seeing on the on the screen now some definitions, right? Some definitions of supported decision-making. So in fact, supported decision-making is a series of relationships, practices, arrangements, and agreements. Relationships, practices, arrangements, and agreements designed to assist an individual with a disability to make and communicate to others decisions about their life. Relationships, practices, arrangements, and agreements. When we think about those four things, those are, again, different pieces of the puzzle. It's not just a thing, right? It's sort of a way of being with some things, some tools integrated that gives the person with a disability essentially a toolbox and known people who can help that person with the disability make decisions and help the person with the disability understand the benefits and consequences of choices and decisions that they make, but then also communicate to others what people with disabilities want. So for example, a relationship. Let's say we have someone who has significant cerebral palsy and is mostly nonverbal. And when they are verbal, it's hard for people who don't know them well to understand what they're saying. And so they might have a supporter whose job is simply, or role, not job, because it's not necessarily a paid person, but whose role is to essentially communicate to others who don't know the person well what the person with the disabilities choices are, decisions are, preferences are. So they, as in their role as a supporter, might just be simply a translator or an interpreter. So they're supporting that person with the disability, communicating their wishes to others. You might have within this sort of framework of supported decision-making, you might have people who the person with the disability decides that they want to help them to serve as advisors and to help them make decisions. So they might say, I don't know what's going to happen if I choose A or if I choose B. Can you, Tim, my ally, can you help me think about this, or help me think this through? That can be a relationship, that can be a practice, that can be an arrangement. When we get to agreements, that's when we get to the tools, and that's when we get to the legally recognized tools, because in the wider world, we need legal tools to facilitate sharing information, to facilitate exchange of information, to facilitate actions, legal actions, those kinds of things. And so that when we unpack this definition of supported decision-making, we then dig into what those relationships, what relationships have to do with supported decision-making, what practices have to do, what people do, same with arrangements, and then what are those legal tools. So for the people a national level who were sort of at the forefront of thinking about supported decision-making, a definition that they use is an alternative to guardianship, through which people use friends, family members, and professionals to help them understand situations and choices they face, so they make their own decisions without the need for guardianship. So before we get into the tools and processes and the actual nuts and bolts, any questions or any thoughts? I appreciate people putting comments in the chat box. Angie, yeah, Angie writes, it wasn't until recently I ever thought of it taking away civil rights. I love that you said families still have the right to be informed, even if the choice would be the same in the end. And truly, it was that was an eye-opener to me. And I always considered myself a pretty well-informed advocate alongside my son. But this, this was an area that I guess because it had always been presented to me as something that is done and this is the path you're on, I never questioned it because I trusted all the people that said, this is the path you're on and you're going to go seek guardianship and it's the right thing to do. And I never sort of questioned it. So it was a reminder that nothing should be sort of a pro forma thing and that everything should be questioned. But yeah, Tim.
And Barbara, that just makes me think that, sometimes it sort of becomes this package deal is, okay, your child maybe, starts with birth to 3. And then they go into early childhood. When they get into schools, they have an IEP. And then we talk about, well, are they on the children's long-term support waiver? Okay, they're getting support by a waiver. They have an IEP, they're getting support. Well, then of course, the next step is guardianship. And that's just not necessarily the next step.
Exactly.
But this whole thing seems to get packaged together of if you have a disability, you have an IEP, you have long-term supports, you're on Medicaid, maybe you have Katie Beckett. Well, then this happens next.
Right.
And it's all been there. And that's just, we need to separate that step out because of all the changes that occur at 18.
And one of the things I found really eye-opening for me was the first time I actually read guardianship papers, because it was an idea in my head. And when I read the paper and realized exactly what was taken away from the young adults, that was like, oh my gosh, like this is so much more than what I thought it was. I thought, so that was really the most eye-opening, was to actually see a set of guardianship papers and read them.
Yeah, it is really eye-opening. And, again, Shana, I feel like I should have had that aha. But, as a parent of a very involved person, and transition is a crazy time for everybody, right? But from my perspective as a parent, there was so much going on, and there was so much I guess for me, a lot of emotional stuff about, will my son continue to have the great life that he's having in school? What's going to happen when he leaves school? What's going to happen, when I'm not around anymore to support him? All of these things are getting confounded and go around and around and around in parents' heads. And I think that the impact of reading those guardianship papers never really, until years later, sort of sank in to what it really meant, about taking away those rights. So I think, with families, when we talk about supported decision-making, we really also have to absolutely recognize the emotional impact of their kids turning 18. Because there is a huge emotional impact there, whether the family recognizes it or not. Now, Jenny asks a question that is not silly at all. None of these questions are silly, but the legal word for the person for whom you have guardianship over is that they are your ward, W-A-R-D. Now, that is a legal term. It's a term that I don't like at all. I mean, um, yeah, but that is the legal term. And I use the word ally when I talk about supporters who help people with disabilities make decisions. They are their allies, and then or supporters. But that's how I use the word ally. So great question. So let's jump into these tools for supported decision making. So as I said, the tools are sort of on a continuum, okay, from the least restricted to the most restricted, which is guardianship. And all the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bullets, there's 6 bullets on this slide. The first 5 all allow the person with the disability to retain their civil rights to decision making. It's the last bullet is the only tool that takes that right away, and that's the one that's guardianship. So releases of information and consent are the least restrictive tool. Basically, the person with the disability signs a form from an entity. It could be from, you would certainly are aware of the forms at schools, but schools, banks, healthcare systems, insurance companies, all will have a release of information, because basically personal information is protected. That's a huge thing in our country, is the right to privacy and the right for our information to remain private. And so institutions have consent forms, information release forms that people have to sign if they want to share information with someone else. So at the very least, when somebody turns 18, they need to sign a release of information for whoever they want to help them make decisions, or for whomever they want to share information. And this is super important. Because without this, information cannot be shared. So if either you're a family or you're working with families who might not have other solutions in place at the time that the person turns 18, at the very least, you want to have this release of information signed. So I would put a star next to this when you get your copy of the PowerPoint, which I think Tim's sending out tomorrow, along with a resource sheet. Yes, he's shaking his head. Yes, thank you. Then there's powers of attorney for healthcare and finance. Some people say there are powers of attorney for education. I have not seen them, but for powers of attorney for healthcare and finance, they have those forms actually on the Department of Health Services website. And Tim, you just put in release of information consent. What in the chat box?
Yeah, you said to star it, Barbara. So I started for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So powers of attorney for healthcare and finance are available on the Department of Health Services website for download. They are not particular to an institution. However, they are particular to the state of Wisconsin. So different states have different power of attorney forms. And Tim just popped into the chat box the address where you can get these forms, these advanced directive forms, and powers of attorney at the Department of Health Services. And you'll also get this on your handout that he emails tomorrow. But, and these forms have instructions about how to utilize them. This is essentially giving someone authority to make decisions on your behalf, but they can be taken back. They can be changed. And so a question was, what if the child doesn't fully understand why they have to sign these forms? Are you referring to the release of information and consent forms? Okay, so yes. So I would use language that was, that they understood. So like, you might, which is, I'm sorry, I mean, it's obvious, but like, so what I might say to my son, Ben, if I asked him to sign a form is, Ben, do you want, your school to still be able to share information with me? Do you want me to be able to help you at your IEP team? Ben, do you want, your doctor to share information with me, or for me to be able to come with you to your doctor's appointments and, share information with the doctor? So that's why I'm asking you to sign these forms. Does that make sense? Okay, great. So I would, yeah, so I would try and frame it in the way that the person, it makes sense to the person, about at in whatever way you're most comfortable with. So going through these tools, there is a tool that's offered by the Social Security Administration called a representative payee trustee. And that person is named, can be named when a Social Security account is open for somebody. And that the role of that person is to receive the Social Security recipient's money and then to pay it out for their food, clothing, and housing expenses, because those are the expenses that are covered by Social Security. It's also the responsibility then of the representative payee trustee to submit annual forms about how the funds are spent. And so that kind of role only exists with the Social Security Administration. Then for finances, you can consider restricted bank accounts as a way of, or joint bank accounts as a way of helping a person to manage their money. And then there are these new legal tools called supported decision-making agreements. And supported decision-making agreements are those tools that I mentioned earlier that came into existence in Wisconsin about 5 or 6 years ago. And as I said, they're championed by the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities. And on their website, they have an awesome toolkit about that actually talks about this whole sort of spectrum of supported decision-making, but also has sort of how-to instructions about how to work with supported decision-making agreements. In a nutshell, supported decision-making agreements are legally recognized in Wisconsin, and they allow the person with the disability to make decisions about who's going to support them in different aspects of their life. So they might name person A as a supporter for healthcare. They might name person B as a supporter for finances. They might name people A and B as supporters for education, for example. And then the person with the disability actually identifies what areas they want support in. And then the person with the disability is able to end this arrangement at any time and name other supporters, or choose that they don't want to have any other supporters. So basically all decision-making rights remain with the individual. Then there is this, let's see, then there is this other tool called, well, guardianship, right? And within that spectrum of guardianship, there are different options. And it's important also for people to be informed about what these different options are within guardianship. There's partial guardianship, there's full guardianship, there might be temporary guardianship or permanent guardianship. Even within full and permanent guardianship, there are options for a person to retain some rights, such as getting different kinds of licenses, getting married, voting, all without the guardian's permission. So those are decisions that the guardian makes. Now, in the guardianship process, there are protections for the individual with disabilities. There is a court-appointed role for a person called a guardian ad litem. And that guardian ad litem is essentially an advocate for the person with the disability to make sure that there isn't any coercion going on, that the person with the disability, to the best of their ability, understands what's happening, and understands basically that their rights are, as best as they can, that their rights are being taken away and given over to somebody else, their decision-making rights. So that's part of the whole process of guardianship, is the enrollment, the usage of a person called a guardian ad litem. Now, I'm just looking at the chat and seeing that for the bank accounts, will the person's income affect their eligibility for SSI and other benefits? So for people 18 and over, SSI eligibility is based only on the individual's income and assets, regardless of joint bank accounts, regardless of, well, yeah. So if there's a joint bank account, that those finances in that joint bank account would count toward the person's income and assets, but it's just the person's income and assets. So it's not, so if you were to have a joint bank account with someone who would be eligible for public benefits, you would want to only have their money in that account, so that additional money is not held against them and counted toward their income or asset level. Does that make sense? Yes, you can absolutely have access to it. If yes, so Ben and I have so even though I'm Ben's guardian, even if I wasn't Ben's guardian, if Ben and I had a joint bank, well, yeah, perfect example here. So when one of my typically developing sons was in college, he and I had a shared bank account, and we would both, because it was a joint bank account, we would both have access to the funds in it. So it all goes down to how you have it signed up, set up. And yes, so you could be a signer on the account. Yep, absolutely. But again, remember, whatever goes into that account, because their name is on it, counts with their income and assets. So you would only want to have their money in there. Other questions before we leave this? I know we have just about 10 minutes left. And I want to just talk a little bit more about supported decision-making tools, but any questions or comments? Okay. So let's talk about these supported decision-making agreements, these tools. We already talked about Wisconsin formalized this concept of supported decision-making into a law and came up with these supported decision-making agreements. The individual with the disability completes them and names a supporter or supporters. They, and as we talked about, the supporter can assist with obtaining information, giving information, communicating the individual's decisions, and assisting the individual in understanding information that they receive and different options. And as we said, these are flexible and can easily be updated. So this is, whoops, sorry. Okay, so the supporter, this is what the supporter can and cannot do. The supporter cannot make the decisions, right? The individual with the disability makes the decisions. The individual with the disability signs the documents. They are bound to, as you or I would be, to any legal agreements. The supporter's authority is limited to what is given to them by the individual with the disability. At no point does any declaration of incompetence need to be declared for an individual, like it does have to be done in a guardianship hearing. Supported decision-making agreements must be in writing. They're voluntary. They need to be witnessed. They can be used in conjunction with full or limited guardianship and powers of attorney. And the toolkit that the Board for Developmental Disabilities has talks about that. And like we talked about, supported decision-making agreements can be revoked at any time. And so you might so for example, you might want to have a supported decision-making agreement in place with somebody who would serve as that person's essentially interpreter or communicator. And so say I have trouble expressing what I want to say. Tim has known me forever, but yet my parents, I am really young, my parents are my guardians, right? But I don't want them going with me to everything and communicating. So I would ask Tim to come with me to different, maybe community events or to IEP meetings and serve as my communicator. Not necessarily, I might not give him decision-making authority, I might give him communication authority. And what does that look like? Well, here. So this is what is included in supported decision-making agreements, or what can be, right? So this is a piece of the agreement, and it says different things that the supporter can help. And one of those things might be assistance with seeking work, or applying for public benefits, or taking care of my mental health, or in fact, helping me manage my finances, or helping me manage my health care, or get some basic needs, obtaining food, clothing, and shelter. And so, and then there's space on these agreements to write in different things if it's not on this checklist. And so there is a very wide breadth of what can be included in supported decision-making agreements. So as we talked about, these can be used to complement one another. We talked a little bit about guardianship, right? And in this presentation, we can spend a good amount of time, and some people do, in talking about the, again, besides the difference in those tools that I showed you. Let's go back. Whoops. Oh, goodness. Okay, these tools, So now I said that these first 5 bullets maintain somebody's right to make their own decision. It's the last bullet of guardianship that takes the right away. The other difference is in these first 5 bullets, a person does not need to be called out or determined to be incompetent to make decisions. They there is no judgment or guidance on somebody's competency or incompetency when these tools are used. It's only in that last tool of guardianship where somebody in fact does need to be considered to be incompetent. And I have totally lost where I am on this PowerPoint, so I apologize. I'm going backwards and forwards, and I don't know where I am. Okay. So here is, this definition is is a definition on competence and incompetence, and what's also on this slide talks about is an advocate for people with disabilities, Thomas Nerney, who says we have to reject the very idea of incompetence. We need to replace it with the idea of assisted competence. And that will include a range of supports that will enable individuals with disabilities to receive assistance in decision-making that will preserve their rights. So again, it's sort of reframing this whole paradigm of who's competent, what is competent, what does somebody need to make informed decisions, to make informed choices, and where does this all fall in with legally recognized tools that people can use. So what it does is it really, when we talk about this whole notion of supported decision making, we're really talking about a very broad range of considerations. So it's not just that somebody is it's not just that we're looking at tools, we're talking also about a philosophy, and we're talking about a values-based judgment around choice-making, decision-making, and civil rights. So I'm curious when it's framed like that, if that raises any other questions that people might have around this. Well, I hope that you found the information that we presented tonight to be helpful, to be thought-provoking, and that you would feel encouraged to share this information with other families you support, and others who support families. It does make life more complicated, right? And what it does is that there isn't that sort of clear-cut option that has always been available, that clear path that was really given to Ben and I 12 years ago, which was you're going to guardianship, and never talked about anything else. So I encourage you to work with others to help inform other families, to help inform other professional allies of families and youth, to help them understand what these options are. So
Barbara,
Thanks, Tim.
I just added to the chat,
Yeah.
the sort of building on what is the responsibility then of the educational system. And so I just refer people to the DPI Information Update Bulletin 19.01 on supported decision-making.
Ah,
That
great.
explains that it is that this has to be done, that this is an expectation in DPI. Trying to find, I want to quote it directly. And of course I lost the quote that I wanted. Because I want to make sure that everybody understands. So what it says, it references one of the statutes, but it says information on supported decision-making should be provided anytime guardianship and alternatives are discussed, including during any and all discussions about transfers of rights at age of majority. And so DPI is very clear that the pathway of, hey, they're in special education and they're receiving Medicaid or whatever, straight to guardianship. As DPI says that no, you have to talk supported decision-making as well.
So the timeframes, so the question in the chat box is, what timeframe will schools start talking about this? Well, transition is formally introduced to the IEP at age 14. And so I would say that is a great time to start talking about it. It gives people a good amount of time to be able to start to learn, to talk with their child or to talk with students, to think about options, and to really formulate a plan that is best for each individualized person, each individual person. It's, you know, supported decision-making has to be individualized, right? All service delivery has to be individualized, but there are so many nuances that happen. And to start thinking about options early, but yet keeping your mind open that there can be a tremendous amount of growth and development that happens with young people between the ages of 14 and 18. That one option that you start thinking about at 14 might not be the option that you choose, that you think about at 16, and might not be the option that you choose at age 18. But again, actively thinking and considering what experiences and opportunities might be built on to develop as much as possible a person's decision-making skills. I think that's one of the things that the transition IEP can be extremely valuable for. You know, again, even if in the end, the family decides that guardianship is the right route, that's fine. But as long as it was an informed decision, right? That's the bottom line of all of this. We're not touting one tool being better than another because it has to be individualized. It has to meet the needs of the person. But I guess my final closing thoughts would be, if people are on the fence about what decision might be better than other decisions, what choice might be better than other choices, I would encourage them to look at least restrictive options first before they go to more restrictive options. Particularly with guardianship, it's very difficult to undo. Once you go to court and say that somebody is incompetent to make decisions, you then have to go back to court and demonstrate and provide evidence about what has changed in that person's life to affect their decision-making capabilities. And for people with lifelong disabilities or developmental disabilities that began at birth, it's very hard, or early on, it's very hard to undo a guardianship. It's not impossible, but it's very hard. And so, as I said, if people are not sure which direction to go, they should be encouraged to look at less restrictive options before they look at guardianship. So that's my closing comment.
Well, thank you so much, Barbara, because that ties really into the educational system and their desire for least restrictive environment as
Exactly.
well. And so that's a
Exactly.
really great tie-in. I want to thank everybody. Thank you, Barbara, for being here tonight. And thank you,
pleasure.
everybody, for participating tonight and also in the previous Transition Talks Tuesdays. This has been so much fun to partner with the School District of Janesville. Really appreciate their collaboration and their partnership. I did put a evaluation for Transition Talks Tuesdays into the chat if you have a moment before we close out to go ahead and do that. But thank you all very much and have a fantastic rest of your December. Celebrate however you want to celebrate. Just celebrate with joy. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Take care, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.